There'll be a national cannabis cap set every year by a powerful authority that'll also carve that green quota up between licensed growers if voters choose to legalise cannabis. The government's released the final version of the Cannabis Legislation and Legalisation and Control Bill. That's at the centre of one of two referendums that will be decided at this year's election. That same Cannabis Regulatory Authority will decide the potency of cannabis products, who gets licences, where commercial premises can set up, and it will also collect tax. Justice Minister Andrew Little says the cap will be set according to estimates of current use.
We know that there is a part of the population who consume at the moment and who do so apparently reasonably safely, so we can't stop that. But knowing that this is a substance that can cause harm, it's a substance that if it is legalised, if that's what the voters want, then needs to be tightly controlled and regulated, and that's what this draft bill seeks to do.
So if the cap is going to be based on consumption levels now, where do you get that figure from? How do you know?
Well, you can only sort of roughly estimate, and you do that from the kind of survey data that's been around for some time. So there's estimates of between 250 and 300,000 New Zealanders who have used in the previous 12 months. Some of those will be regular users, some will be heavy users, some will be occasional casual users. But you can sort of estimate it from there, and then you seek to regulate from that.
So if one of the primary goals, which it is, of this legislation is to reduce consumption over time, will that cap shrink on an annual basis?
Well, it will go down over time, yes, that's the plan.
But not every year?
Look, one of the roles of the regulatory authority is to put together a plan for managing the substance and including its availability and the cap. So I would expect, if the voters vote for this and we pass the legislation and it's all set up and put in place, then very early on, part of their planning will be how do you manage down the volume of cannabis that is consumed in New Zealand.
So that Cannabis Regulatory Authority, it's going to set the national cultivation allowance. It is going to, hand out the quota. It's also going to be in charge of the licences. That is a lot of power. So who are these people going to be?
Yeah, and so we want a range of expertise there. They'll also be supported by a cannabis advisory group. You'll get your technical advice from, so your medical and scientific advice. But these will be people who I imagine there'll be, people with a health background there as well, people with a community background, and a range of people who are responsible decision makers.
Will they be appointed by you?
It's an advisory body. They are part of the public service. I imagine that'll be in the nature of an outfit that'll be kind of an adjunct to the Ministry of Health, and it'll go through a state sector appointment process. So not necessarily a ministerial appointment, but appointed through the State Service Commission's appointment processes.
So if I can go back to the quota, so no one business can have more than 20% of that quota. What allowance is going to be given for Māori business?
That was one of the things that the Ministry of Justice did early in the year was they did a series of 10 wānanga with Māori communities. And although there were mixed reactions about whether to legalise or not, what the overwhelming consensus was that if it is going to be legalised, then we want to be engaged in this, both in regulation but also in participation. So the draft bill gives a statutory nod to ensuring that the provision of cannabis retail is to be, and indeed harvesting and growing, is to acknowledge communities where this substance is present and to make sure those communities are engaged in it.
So does that nod go so far as ring-fencing a certain proportion of this business for Māori or guaranteeing a certain amount of it to Māori businesses?
No, it doesn't go that far, but it does give Māori an influence and a seat around the decision-making table to make sure that those interests are articulated at the decision-making points. It doesn't guarantee any potential grower or retailer any role in it, but Māori will be part of the regulation decision-making.
So do you want this to be a successful business? I mean, have you spoken to the Minister for Primary Industries? Do you want this to be an industry that employs people, makes money and has high-end jobs?
To be honest, I don't have a particular view about it. This has been, it's in the confidence and supply agreement between Labor and the Greens to have a referendum. My job has been to put together a referendum and a regulatory regime so people can understand when they're making a decision about whether they want to see cannabis legalised in New Zealand, this is what it could look like. But in the end, that's a decision that's in the hands of the voters. I'm not going to express a view one way or the other. I think we've done, the government, but actually also the cross-party working group that formed at the end of last year with other parties in Parliament. We had 3, I think, very good meetings. We've done the best, I think, to put together a regime that looks to safety and health first, but allows those who wish to consume the substance to do so, but in a way that is also safe for the community as well.
Does this bill allow for commercial success as well, though, do you think?
Well, to the extent that it allows growers and it allows retailers who have to be licensed, and admittedly they have to meet various requirements, there's no reason why they should be able to operate on a commercial basis. But the first obligation in terms of regulation for a substance like this that I think the government has is to make sure that it is safe, and for those who are most vulnerable to unsafe results from using it, that they are kept safe, and that is what this is directed at. Young people using cannabis are the most at risk, and we have to keep it out of the hands of young people.
Will you be voting for your own piece of legislation?
I'll be voting in the secret ballot like everybody else, yes.
And that was the Justice Minister, Andrew Little.